Now, last week we looked at the subject of suffering, if you recall, and we said, well, we quoted from C.S. Lewis, who described suffering as God's megaphone to a deaf world. Do you remember that? It's a great line. God's megaphone to a deaf world. And you can respond to suffering in two ways if you're outside of salvation, and that is, one, you can become bitter, or two, hopefully you become better. The better being that you are compelled to answer the question, why? Why is this happening? What's it all about? Why am I here? What is the purpose of life? Why am I going during this suffering? What can I learn from this? And people who do that, who pursue an answer to try and find comfort maybe, will hopefully end up knowing God. The sacrifice to God is a broken spirit. So people who are broken sometimes will, in that lowest place, turn to God. Perhaps that's been your experience. But tonight we go into a different kind of suffering, and that is suffering that a Christian will experience, which God permits for the good of that Christian, for their growth, for their betterment, that they might grow up in fullness to the stature of Jesus Christ. More of him and less of me. That's the idea behind it. So Paul starts out by telling us that this suffering, this thorn in the flesh that was sent to buffet him, came about because he was so incredibly blessed. We're told in verse 1, it's not expedient me to glory like this, but I'm going to. And he's having to, because remember, he's trying to counter the claims of these so-called super apostles in Corinth. But he says, I will come to visions and revelations of the Lord. I knew a man, so he uses the third person as if to distance himself. This is not about me. This is about what God has done in me, for me, or through me. He says, I knew a man in Christ above 14 years ago, I cannot tell, such an one caught up to the third heaven. Now just a couple of interesting points. In verse 1, he talks about visions and revelations. What is the difference between a vision and a revelation? Well, when I looked this up, I've discovered that the word used for visions means presentations, perceived in a state which is neither sleeping nor waking, but which are regarded as objective. So there's some sense in being translated into a moment where you're neither asleep nor awake, but you're presented with something spiritual and something real. Revelation, on the other hand, is the truth apprehended as a result of the vision. That's the difference. So you can have a vision, but revelation is, what was that vision about? What was it meant to teach me? Now, at this point, I hope you don't mind, but as some are aware, I've had visions myself, and I won't go into too much detail, but those visions were profound, and they taught me certain biblical truths that otherwise I would not have comprehended from just reading scripture. I'll be honest with you. I had to have those because I was so deeply entrenched, brainwashed in Jehovah's Witnesses. So through those visions I understood the nature of our what's called anthropology. That's a posh word for our makeup. That is, that we have a spirit, something Jehovah's Witnesses don't teach. I learned that all men are born dead in trespasses and sins. And I learned that there is a heaven and there is a hell. So,
could you share in brief, one of those visions?
Well, I only mentioned it because I didn't want to appear to be... yeah, okay. Right.
Don't mention the one that might give anyone nightmares.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
You start off with I knew a man who had a vision.
Yeah, I knew a man who had a vision. Okay, right, yeah. I'll just give you one one brief one, okay, and it's not too scary. Nor is it like one of those weirdo near-death. It's nothing like those daft ones you get on YouTube. Yeah, it's nothing like that. But I was in not long after I was born again and had this amazing experience with the Lord. I was in Didsbury having a cup of coffee. Okay, and I was still trying to get to grips with doctrine, theology, try and understand. What is truth? What is biblical truth? Because JWs have an answer for everything, and some of their answers are plausible. And one of the things I couldn't get my head around was the fact that we have a spirit in our bodies, that we are a spirit-body unity. Okay, they just teach what's called physicalism. That is, you are material, you are atoms, molecules, chemicals, fizzing, and that's it. So when you die, you're gone, and there's no afterlife, no sort of netherworld, so to speak. Well, there I was in Didsbury, right, having a cup of coffee, and I just lifted me. This is how God works. I just lifted my drink, and suddenly, from nowhere, the world stopped, and I looked around me. It was in a split second, and everybody was dead and yet living. Everything, it seemed to me, was grey, and all the people that I was witnessing, on their way doing their stuff, had no life in themselves, somewhat zombie-like, not like in a movie, but that kind of alive and yet dead. And then as quickly as the vision came, and I saw this, and I realised, oh my goodness, everybody's dead and yet alive, it went. And as the second that I'll tell you, the second after that experience, what came to mind? Ephesians chapter 2. Well, let's look at it together. Ephesians 2. Ephesians 2. And it talks about in verse
5?
Yes, verse 2 it says, "And you hath he quickened, who were dead in trespasses and sins." Verse 5, "Even when we were dead in sins, hath quickened us together with Christ." And I knew there and then, oh my goodness, everybody has a spirit, but their spirit is dead. The Jehovah's Witnesses are wrong. We have a metaphysical aspect to us, which is dead because of the fall, but can be made alive, can be quickened. And that's what's happened to me, that my spirit is now alive, and I'm alive here, and what I've just witnessed is all of humanity, if you like, before me, who don't know Christ, who are yet dead in their sins, dead in their trespasses. And I knew then, of course, the revelation was apprehension. So I had the vision. Revelation was we are spirit as well as body, and that your spirit needs to be made alive by Christ. So there's an example. Convinced? No, I'll get the.
So can I just ask?
Yeah, of course you have. Yeah.
And the Jehovah's Witnesses does not understand
Yeah.
that when Jesus says what gives birth to flesh is flesh and what gives birth to spirit is spirit. You
Yeah.
don't have that.
That's a really good apologetic. Actually, that's a fantastic verse you could use with them. But what I was always taught was the spirit is a life force, much like electricity. So it's not you, the person, united with your body. It's simply kind of like a spark of life that generates you. No different. They give the example of this. If you unplug a fan, the fan stops. The electricity's gone from the fan, so it stops. Electricity isn't personified, is it? It's nothing, it's just a force. And similarly, the spirit when you die, it's like pulling electricity out, pulling the force out of you, this spark of life, and you just
We're
die.
talking about birth. It's
Well,
what gives birth to
Yeah.
flesh is flesh.
Will give birth to spirit is spirit. Yeah. Well, yeah. Not thought of that one. Yeah. Well, God didn't choose to use that one, but He
Oh,
could have done, because that's a good one. Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, it's just, the thing is, even with, I suppose what I'm trying to say as well is that even with that kind of good theology, and that is a good apologetic, probably wouldn't have convinced me as compared with a vision. And as I say, there have been others where I have seen, by God's grace, in reality, what is true. And it's completely undone, dismantled JW teaching, JW false doctrine. So, okay, where are we at after that diversion? Speaks in the third, yes. Right, so yes, so as I say, you're speaking in the third person, and that's just a reminder that the glory belongs to God, and in spite of ourselves, in spite of our weaknesses, God can bless us with these types of visions, so that when you are given a thorn in the flesh, do you appreciate just how blessed you are, and just how, frankly, nothing you are, but you are only something because of God. Yes. So, the third heaven, you might be interested, that's a sort of a rabbinic thing. Third heaven, the first heaven would be the sky. The second heaven would be the starry heavens. And then the third heaven is the presence of God Himself. That's the idea there. So, as a result of this wonderful vision, there is the sublime, isn't there, in life, and then sometimes there's God's sort of, well, he can put you in your place, can't He, be so vicious. I don't know whether you've experienced that in your life. I certainly have, where you're given a thorn in the flesh. I don't know whether anybody here else has that kind of thing, or if not, He'll discipline you. You know, He'll put you on your back and sort you out of your pride or self-reliance or self-will. In this case, to curb any pride, to stop any kind of conceit, we're told in verse 7, "Lest I should be exalted above measure through the abundance of the revelations, there was given to me a thorn in the flesh, the messenger of Satan, to buffet me, lest I should be exalted above measure." So this helped Paul to know his place and rely on the Lord. So what is this thorn in the flesh? Well, firstly, I'd like to say I'm kind of happy that we don't know what it is. Because if we did know what it is, we'd be thinking, well, maybe I haven't got a thorn in the flesh, maybe it was only Paul. But I actually think the fact that we don't know what it is helps us to look at our own life journey, our own Christian walk, and think, maybe that's why I've got this, maybe that's why I suffer with whatever it might be, because this is what the Lord uses if we allow Him to. Just some ideas. I don't know if you knew this one. This was news to me, that Paul's thorn could have come in the form of Jewish persecution because of the surrounding context, these opponents that are always after him and running him down. If you go, well, we won't go there, but Numbers 33 verse 55 talks about the enemies of God, or the enemies of Israel, being like thorns in their flesh, which is interesting. Paul, actually, it says, he could have regretted his past persecution of the church, and this may have haunted him, leading him to depression, and kept him humble. The fact that what he was, what he had been. So there's one explanation. And of course, we all know what the classic explanation is. It was his eyesight, an issue with his eyesight. You know, remember the Galatians said they would have even given their own eyes for him. In fact, there's a really good incidental text to prove that this might be the case, that he had an issue with his eyesight. It's quite amusing in a way. If you go to Acts chapter 23, Acts 23, now this is the time that Paul is before the Sanhedrin, and yeah, he's been arrested, he's appealed to Rome, but currently he's before the council, and we'll take it up from verse 2 of Acts chapter 23. And it says there, "And the high priest Ananias commanded them that stood by him to smite him on the mouth. Then said Paul unto him, God shall smite thee, thou whited wall. For sittest thou to judge me after the law, and commandest me to be smitten contrary to the law? And they that stood by said, Revilest thou God's high priest? Here it is. Then said Paul, I wist not, brethren, that means I knew not, brethren, that he was the high priest. For it is written, Thou shalt not speak evil of the ruler of thy people. So, Paul is before the Sanhedrin, okay? The high priest has a go at him, basically. Paul, a sharp rebuttal, and then they say to him, that's the high priest you're talking to. And he says, I didn't know it was the high priest. And the thinking is, or most commentators will say, that he didn't see him. He couldn't see him properly, because he has a disorder of the eyes. So he didn't know for certain that he'd responded in kind to the high priest. Otherwise, why would he then, sort of in a roundabout way, make an apology where he says, it is written, for it is written, Thou shalt not speak evil of the ruler of thy people. So that was quite interesting. Bit of insight. Which gives weight to this theory that he was troubled in his vision. Right, okay. So, whether or not you believe that doesn't really matter. What we do believe is that there was a thorn in the flesh, and let's face it, some of us have that even today. Whatever it might be. I mean, look at the examples that I've just given. There's others as well about Paul. Malta fever, malaria, epilepsy, convulsive attacks, chronic ophthalmia. I mean, and the list does go on. But the point is that through adversity, God targets the areas of self-will in our lives. Within a thorn in the flesh, he'll target the area of self-will. And he wants to break attitudes that don't honour him, which are self-righteousness, self-reliance, and self-centeredness. If you go to Galatians 5, what is self? What does it look like? So we've got in verse 22, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance. Against such thing there is no law. And they that are Christ's have crucified the flesh with the affections and lusts. If we live in the Spirit, let us also walk in the Spirit. Let us not be desirous of vain glory, provoking one another, envying one another. Now, why we mention that section is that through this thorn, we hope that God can remove the works of the flesh, and in their stead put the fruit of the Spirit. And I think it's quite helpful actually to go through the fruit of the Spirit. We know what the fruit is, but what is the opposite of that? And when you look at the opposite of each of the fruit, of each aspect of the fruit, it helps you to see or think about, that's what I need to be working on, and this is what I need to replace it with. So, for example, start with love. What's the opposite of love? Hate. Although, if you get some scholar, they'll say it's not just hate. It's apathy. It's not just hate. Apathy is just as bad. An indifference. Who cares? You see. That is also the opposite of love. Opposite of joy. Remember, joy isn't happiness. Joy is different. Joy is that inner contentment. What's the opposite of that? Discontent. Are you a malcontent? Yeah, I mean, you get people like that, don't you? Just are not contented. Peace. The love, the peace of God that is beyond understanding. The opposite of peace. Well, are you argumentative? Are you looking for a fight? Are you, as it says earlier, provoking, envying? What about long-suffering? Well, long-suffering is patience, therefore the opposite is impatience. Are you an impatient person? Crabby like and impatient like I am. With Charlotte. Yeah, well, it's something I battle with. Gentleness. Are you hard? That's the opposite. Hard, harsh. Are you flint-like? You get people like that, and they're hard people. You just feel. You don't feel at ease around them because they're. Yeah, they're not nice people, are they? Well, that's because they're not godly. Goodness. Well, the opposite is obviously badness. Faith. But faith isn't just belief, is it? Faith is trust. Trusting in God. Leaving it with Him and letting go. The opposite of that is not letting go of it. Not leaving it with God. Not getting out of the way. Not trusting. An issue maybe arises with money. And you worry and you worry and you worry. What we're going to do? Well, Jesus says not to be anxious, doesn't He? Have no anxiety for the day. Meekness. Opposite of meekness. Well, meekness carries the thought of humility, doesn't it? A mildness, a willing to consider the other as superior. Or are we the one who thinks very much a lot of ourselves? Why aren't people a bit more like me? Oh my goodness. No, why aren't people more like Jesus? And that's it, isn't it? No, temperance. So, yeah, if you're not temperate, the opposite of that is to be very liberal, isn't it? And just fill your boots, as they say, and enjoy life to the full. Yeah. It's a kind of greediness. Okay. So that's what Jesus doesn't want us to be. And if any of those issues you're thinking, let the thorn of the flesh do its work. Let the Spirit inhabit you. Less of you and more of God. Just on that very point of this thorn, it's interesting that it's quite similar to brokenness. A thorn in the flesh. Have you ever been in that place where you've felt broken? Where you've, I have. I think I've told everybody about, having a brokenness in mentally. Sometimes it can go on. Sometimes it's just a a punctiliar moment where you're grounded down. But see it the way God sees it, which is his way of working in you for your eternal good. Moses was broken, wasn't he? In fact, he spent 40 years learning to obey the Lord, and then finally he was used to free Israel. But not until a point where he could even speak to Pharaoh. He had to get Aaron to do it. That's how broken he was. That it was all God's doing and not, look at me, I have a pedigree, that is, I'm from Egyptian royalty. And the other example I think is Peter, who Jesus actually directly rebuked Peter, and it came that dreadful moment where he denies Jesus and then he saw him. Can you imagine that look from God? Wow. And yet Peter was used in such an amazing way to get the church going. You see that in Acts chapter 2. So don't resist the thorn in the flesh. Don't resist brokenness. Don't resist God's discipline or chastening. Why do we resist it? Got some examples here. Pride, ignorance, fear. You might be afraid of facing the reality of this thorn, trying to run away from it. Just rebellion, just not giving in to God's will for you. But the consequences of resisting that, we hinder our relationship with the Lord, we delay the fulfillment of God's will in our lives, we hurt those who are closest to us. That can happen. We don't allow God to work in us and change us. We limit what the Father can do through our gifts and talents. You don't become a vessel of much use, do we? If you can't get in there and use you. And can you imagine this? We are put on the shelf, unused by the Lord and prevented from experiencing his blessings and future rewards. That wouldn't be very pleasant, would it, to face God at the judgment, the Bema seat as they call it, of rewards, the reward seat, if indeed you believe in that. Some might not. But they say there's two judgments, the great white throne and the reward judgment, and it would be like bullseye. Look at what you could have won. Do you remember that? When he threw, that was salt in the wound, that was, where they pulled back a screen and there it was, a yacht or a motor car, yeah, or a round the world cruise, super smashing great. Look at what you could have won. Thanks very much, Jim Bowen. So, well, we don't. No, thank you. What we want is hopefully to get that blessing and reward, and of course, if we do, wow, we'll have life and life abundantly. So there's blessings on the other side of brokenness, and they're worth it.